Everyone, it's June 3rd. We're here for the weekly press conference. And so on the COVID-19 front, our cases in Pennington County continue to rise. We're up 85 cases from this time last week. And the COVID testing in Pennington County has gone up as well. We've had a total of 3,826 tests and about a 6.7% positive rate. So that's pretty good. That means to me that many more tests are being performed on people. When we started out, this percentage was much, much higher. So I think the testing is a positive note in all this. We are increasing, though, as planned. I'm not sure if it's as drastically as we thought a week ago, but we are going up significantly. So Monday night's council meeting, the council approved extending the current COVID business regulations, and that ordinance will expire now at the end of July. So once again, we have the city ordinance in place that allows the city council to enact regulations on businesses and to modify those regulations by resolution. And so Monday night they also extended the resolution, and that resolution will expire June 19th. So that will cause the council to take this matter up again at the June 15th council meeting. Our rapid transit system is still targeting June 15th for starting up operations again. I'm told that it's possible that there may be some adjustment to hours or schedules, and to stay tuned. So we will be communicating any changes to rapid transit as we get closer to that date. The employees, the 3 employees who've tested positive at rapid transit are doing well, still recovering, but doing well. On the outskirts of town, we see the Rapid City Regional Airport has been gaining about a 5% increase in its passengers per week lately. They estimate they're still seeing about only 20 to 30% of the normal passenger rate, but it is increasing noticeably. So the other hot item on the agenda has been the protests. Protests are a complicated topic because there are a set of facts, there are a set of rules, and there are a set of emotions, and there are many things that weigh into demonstrations and protests. So in Rapid City, we've seen 3 protests related to the George Floyd death or Black Lives Matter movement. The first was on May 30th in the afternoon hours. And that was largely peaceful. There were a few moments of chaos and 1 arrest. We then saw during the evening hours of June 1st, and that was a relatively peaceful protest as well. And last night, June 2nd, we've seen that these protests are gaining members. The number of participants has grown, and after dark the behavior has become more aggressive, to the extent that last night our police chief designated the protest an unlawful assembly. And that designation really is a brief way to describe an assembly that has become unsafe, unruly, a threat to public safety. And based on that, then, law enforcement is allowed or they are authorized to disperse that group, to make that group leave the area. And of course, all along, for the last 3 days of protests, we have hoped for and received a good deal of cooperation from these groups. But we notice a pattern, an escalating pattern of behavior, made worse only by the overt attempts to agitate this group from the outside. There's a group of counter-protest people that drive around in old pickup trucks and have adorned their trucks and themselves in a way that is offensive or threatening to the protest group. They're doing it just to make them angry, and it's working. So we see a spike in the negative behavior when this group is in the area. So it's not helpful. I certainly wish there was something better they could do with their time. It causes problems for everyone in the community. I just want to say that the resources that we're using to staff these protests is much greater than you would see on a typical day in the summer, because we have to take care of several issues such as traffic safety and pedestrian safety. We monitor this group's movements. In many cases, including this case, we have offered to assist in the demonstration to make sure that it's done safely and effectively. And we also have to plan for the worst. We have seen these protests, even in South Dakota, get out of hand. And we have felt the last 3 nights of protests that these are getting to be closer to getting out of hand. And we want to try to avoid that. But nonetheless, we have to staff up for these things. So without a doubt, we've not got the bookkeeping complete yet, but these protest days like this cost tens of thousands of dollars a day in additional staffing and other costs. So that money's coming right out of the pockets of taxpayers who would rather have other city services. Also the taxpayers that want low taxes and efficient government. So in addition to the increase in aggression of the protest groups, we've seen an obvious overtaking of the original protest group. The original group meets at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening, and they're promoting a peaceful protest. Many people are live streaming these protests so that we can all see and hear what's going on. And every single time we have seen other members infiltrate that original group and try to take over and change the scope of that protest. Last night, as I was listening to one of the people live streaming, one of the original organizers, I heard fear in their voice, I heard disappointment, I heard them pleading with the crowd to remain peaceful and don't let this get carried away. And then I heard this person conclude that control had been lost to the others in the area. So I just want to say this is not a game. This is not fun and games. This is serious business, because you have police officers standing by to protect this city. And we do not want to clash with protesters. Violent protests have absolutely nothing to do with the First Amendment. Nothing. The First Amendment is an important amendment. It is one of the hallmarks of a free society and a free country. We are sworn by oath to protect the Constitution of the United States, which, by the way, also includes protecting the people we serve. So we are not here to suppress the message that's trying to be conveyed. We're here, we're striving to preserve the peace and the overall public safety. We want to work with the protesters, not against them. However, if and when it becomes impossible to accommodate the style of protest that some are seeking, then we will have to take other action. We cannot allow a mob to rule our downtown business district or anywhere else. You know that the threat is being received when our downtown business owners in Rapid City, South Dakota are boarding their windows. You know that the threat is credible because normal people, non-government people, are interpreting this threat as real enough to buy plywood and protect their property from vandalism. So we have an obligation to keep the protest peaceful. So I'm sure there will be more news to report on that. As currently, as we speak, the crowd is massing in the downtown area again with a similar MO, face masks and some with backpacks and flags and signs. And in that group, there are people who simply want to bring awareness to the injustice exhibited in the death of George Floyd. That's all some of these members want to do. They want to know that the government's taking them seriously and that communities are taking them seriously and that they will have some effect on that situation. There are others in the same group, possibly standing shoulder to shoulder with these other people, who want to do nothing but destroy. They want to antagonize. And those goals are not the same. They are not anywhere near the same. So I'm probably going to release a new public statement on this later, but we have an obligation to do better than this. And I've yet to have anyone tell me what the goal is of the protests. If the goal has to be attainable, the goal has to be local, because Rapid City has no influence on how people act in Baltimore or San Antonio or Denver. So we have to have a local goal. We have to have a local group of people willing to roll up sleeves and get to work and work hard on this with their actions and not just their voices. I just want to say from our perspective, from my perspective personally, we're not deaf and we're not blind. We see and hear what has happened in this country for decades. We've studied what's happened in this country for hundreds of years. No one is ignorant of the facts that there is racial or other disparities or discrimination. So we want to work together. And this problem will not be solved in the middle of the street holding a sign. It is impossible to solve that way. But there are likely possible ways to make improvements. Okay? Changing topics. We've heard today that our police chief has announced his retirement. And by the way, he's been talking to me about this for months. This is not an action spurred by any recent occurrences, but Carl Jaggeris has been here for nearly 25 years, serving this department and these citizens in a variety of roles. He'll continue to serve Rapid City and South Dakota in his new role. So we'll miss him at the police department, but he will be doing something just as valuable in his new line of work. So we wish him well. I would take questions from people in the room. If you go to the podium,
Mayor Nathan Thompson with the Rapid City Journal. Related to Chief Jageris's retirement, as you call it, when is his last day, and what will be the process to find his replacement?
His last day will be June 26th, at which time I will appoint an interim chief, and we will, by that time, have started a process of interviewing department members, as well as other individuals, to get an idea, to get a feeling of the culture and the reputation and the challenges that lie ahead. And then we will design a process at that time. So I imagine having an interim chief for 60 days or more while we design and execute a process for selection.
Earlier as well, Mayor, you said that you will probably be making another public statement later on today. Are you considering initiating a curfew at this point?
Well, a curfew is an option, but you know, I think the most powerful person is the person who doesn't like to use their authority. And I'm aware of the impact of government intervention and how it affects people, especially law-abiding people. And so I'm holding that in my back pocket. If we get a situation that cannot be controlled by the field employees of the RCPD, Pennington County Sheriff, South Dakota Highway Patrol, or the National Guard, if there is a threat that needs to be handled differently, then I would bring that curfew out and make that statement. But hope we don't get there, because I think that's a ugly action to take against an entire community. I mean, justified action under the circumstances, but still ugly. I would like not to do it. So that decision will be made in the command post, depending on the circumstances.
Jeff Voss from KOTA. With the employees at Care Campus testing positive, what are the next steps to trace those individuals who either work there or visit the facility to check on their symptoms?
That facility specifically, and others like it, have been included in the state's mass testing initiative. So I imagine there will be many more tests down there. But again, all of the contact tracing occurs through the Department of Health, and we know that they have been in contact. So simple answer, more testing and isolation if necessary. We do have at the emergency shelter, we do have today, I believe, 10 individuals, the majority of which are COVID-19 positive. And so they're being isolated appropriately and cared for in a way to keep them safe and also keep them from spreading the virus.
Having a background in law enforcement, what qualities are you looking for in appointing the next chief of police for Rapid City?
Well, times change. And so I began my career as a police officer in 1984. It was a different time. And I retired in 2014, and even that was a different time. So I think the same qualities that anyone would look for in an employee, in a manager, are important for a police chief, but also someone who has demonstrated a willingness to engage and adopt and serve a community, even at sacrifice to themselves, will be a good candidate. It's not a job for everyone, and we We need to make sure, both with the police and the fire chief selection, that we're doing the best for the community for a generation to come. Because these individuals will likely be in their role long after I am out of mine. So we'll be getting plenty of help from the community in vetting potential candidates and getting input on those, the service of those two departments.
Dave Kidd, News Center 1. Governor Noem talked this morning about any kind of reform or changes in law enforcement needing to be taken locally. As a former police chief, do you have any thoughts on what kind of reform or changes may be needed for Rapid City?
Well, that analysis is an ongoing analysis, and we do the large majority of it internally. We vet, first of all, we vet employees, prospective employees, with psychological evaluations, with a lengthy training and probation period, with a system of training and mentoring that lasts for 1.5 years. And then we have a system of accountability. And as an accredited police agency, we are required to have a system of internal affairs investigations. We're required to publicly report results of those investigations. And we are held accountable by the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation as to whether or not we're doing a good job or trying to sweep something under the rug. So internally, we work every day to make sure that we're treating individuals and preparing employees appropriately. Occasionally, we need to look outside for the advice of others. We continually take input from community members. Our police officers and administrators are connected with community groups, have groups of advisors set up, and just a few years ago hired a consultant from the University of South Dakota Government Affairs Division to do a survey related to race relations in Rapid City. And those results are available publicly. You probably know where they are more than I do at this moment. But we have reviewed those thoroughly. However, you'll also find, for every syllable I just uttered, you'll find a member of this community who feels otherwise, that there are gross injustices being committed every day, that a police officer under no circumstances should be allowed to use deadly force, that every time someone is arrested, there is a bias at work. And we look into every complaint. And it doesn't mean every complaint is going to be founded. In fact, most complaints are unfounded. We have body cam video equipment on every police officer. We have other types of technology that helps us keep not only the officers accountable, but also keeps the facts straight when we have confrontations or contacts with citizens. That's been very valuable. In fact, in a story I remember from shortly before I retired, an angry parent came in to see me when I was police chief to tell me that this police officer stopped his son for no good reason, called him names, racially charged names, treated him poorly. So while the father was seated in my office, we pulled up the video of the contact and watched it together for the first time. And when he was done watching, the father apologized and left my office because no such contact took place. It was very courteous, it was very professional, it was a minor equipment infraction that was verbally corrected. The kid promised to go get it fixed, And that was it. It was a nice exchange. So these types of things happen. I think it's abundantly clear that we're in the best position we've ever been in to keep the facts straight when our contacts with the public. And so we hold ourselves out there as a government agency made up of citizens of this community. I think that's important that we all forget. The government is not different from the citizenry. We're the same people.
Sydney Thurston, Kelloland. Just to compare, in Sioux Falls, there have been about the same number of arrests that there have been so far in Rapid City. Is there any advice that you have for the community, for the protesters or businesses or just anyone that can prevent what we already saw once in South Dakota from happening here in Rapid City?
Well, my advice at this point is don't naively come downtown believing you are going to be part of a peaceful protest, because someone else has a different idea. And you will be grouped up with those other people for a period of time. And so that, I think, presents a dangerous situation, especially when the groups start walking down right near the storefronts. And meanwhile, when the pickup truck drives by with a couple guys hooting and hollering and trying to get everyone upset, that's a volatile situation. So my advice, first of all, is either stay home, do something else fun and exciting besides protesting in Rapid City. But if you feel that you have to protest, then stick to a location that is safe for you. There's plenty of high visibility locations where you're safe, you're out of traffic, and no one's going to bother you. In fact, we'll even make sure no one bothers you. But to roam around downtown yelling, chanting, blocking the road, and making obscene gestures, and hurling out insults at citizens or police officers, not helpful, not going to achieve the goal, is merely an expression of anger. And I get anger. I've raised teenagers. I know how it works when you get into a volatile situation and maybe you say or do something you wish you hadn't. But this is serious business. And from what we have seen the last couple of nights, this can quickly escalate into a peaceful protest, from a peaceful protest to a riot, in the matter of perhaps a single stone being thrown. And that is in no one's best interest. When the protesting group has started to alienate themselves from the rest of the community, they're hurting their cause more than helping. So we're here to empower, enable, and protect groups who want to protest or demonstrate. We'll help provide a public forum. We'll provide security. If the location is right, we'll block off roads to make sure you get your point across. But if the whole point is to defy authorities, then we can't work with that group. And that ultimately, at the end of that continuum, is an ugly confrontation with government. No one wants that, because no one wins. Only everyone loses.
On a separate note, Mayor, last evening was the municipal election for the city of Rapid City. It appears as though we may have a recount in Ward 3, a new person obviously in Ward 1, and a re-election in Ward 4. What is your reaction to yesterday's election results, and what are your thoughts on the recount?
Well, I'm not sure I've ever seen a recount produce different results. Maybe it has. I just don't think I've seen it personally. All three of those members in Ward 3. One was the incumbent and 2 were former city council members. So we will have a changeover there. One of the other former members will take that seat, presumably Jason Solomon. So that's good in terms of having a quicker training curve than what would be typical. In Ward 1, Pat Jones is a former council member from somewhere else, so I think the basics have been covered there. We will have an orientation with Mr. Jones to introduce him or reintroduce him to the city departments and the typical procedures that we use up here during a meeting. And John Roberts will retain his seat in Ward 4, and so no change there. I'm just glad to see people interested in City Hall elected positions. I think it would be a dream from a government standpoint to see multiple people wanting all of the open seats in local government across this nation. You might have heard the term, all politics are local politics. Well, I think the local influence in government is the greatest, because there are few people who give great credibility to what happens in Congress these days. Many of them have never seen a Congress member, and many of them never will. Whereas as a local official, we see our constituents every single day, either in this building or walking somewhere or in a grocery store. We get to interact with them. We create relationships where they feel comfortable calling us by our name and approaching us in public to talk. So I think there's a greater and more regular connection with local. So the fact that people ran for these seats and that as many people voted as did, I think is a positive for Rapid City. So I'm encouraged. There's been a notable change in the council over the last 4 or 5 years. A greater emphasis on accomplishing goals and a greater emphasis on professionalism and doing what needs to be done to make a great city. So I've been pleased with that. And that doesn't mean for a minute that all of them agree with me or vice versa. It's that I think we've created an environment where it's okay for us to disagree without becoming enemies, which was one of my frustrations when I ran for mayor the first time, is that we had factions on the council that were vicious towards each other. And that had been building up for years. And so I think because of the quality of members of the city council, we've gotten past that hurdle, and hopefully we're creating a new culture that will be more attractive to people in the future, especially younger people.
You talked a bit about the extra money going in for law enforcement during the protests. How does that already affect a crippled city budget with the COVID pandemic?
Well, it's no good. We've all made sacrifices. Every department in the city has made sacrifices in order to stay above the red line by the end of 2020. And so it depends. I mean, if the protests die down now and we get back to normal, we can probably recover from it without a great deal of budgeting, rebudgeting. If this continues for days and days or weeks, we will have to likely start chopping from other city programs again, or extending dates of closures of city services, because there's only so much money. People think that government never says that. Well, I'm saying it right now. There's no more money to spend once this money's gone. If we happen to overspend in 1 year, we start with that debt the next year. But we're not allowed to borrow money to operate government. We're not allowed to have a deficit. So we have to balance those books. And so 2020, I predict, is going to be our worst year for budget. 2021 will be better, but still not great. And I think we have a chance of pulling out of it. As we've seen, there's the building is going strong in Rapid City. The B-21 is still on track. There are, believe it or not, a lot of good things still happening, despite everything else that has been trying to kill us or maim us in 2020. The pandemic, all of the bizarre things that have gone on. Everyone I talk to just is waiting for the next shoe to drop. Just, you know, whether it's going to be a flood or a forest fire or what. So I think that speaks a little bit to what the community is feeling. And that is a strain on the community's mental health. We're concerned about that. I'm personally concerned about that. The cumulative strain on the community's mental health is a real issue. Human beings, like other species on this planet, will act out when under stress. So it's best if we try to head those things off, we as a community, not we as a government, but we as individuals. Any other questions from the room? All right, well, thank you for being here today.